little technical difficulties as I've been trying to figure out how to connect the Discord community that I have over to the Start Motto one so we can interact with each other. But that'll have to
Nice.
wait till next week. Hang on 1 second. Copy link. All right. Cool. All right. Should be good. Should be live. Craig, please
Hello.
introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Craig Silverstein. So I started out kind of on my founder's journey pretty early with my first company back in 2011. That was kind of like a media social entertainment resourcing hub for entertainment professionals, either trying to get scripts out there or camera work, camera technology, staffing, things like that. And that was more of kind of like my first epic failure before things really started moving forward with success. So I think it's kind of a running theme where a lot of the founders that you'll see that are successful have a couple failures under their belt and learn a lot, and then start really figuring out what they need to move forward. And then I started consulting for a while for tech companies. One of my really great successes was teaming up with co-founders from a company called Sync Sketch, which ended up being acquired by Unity Technologies. That company was totally bootstrapped up into the acquisition, and was one of the most profitable acquisitions that remained bootstrapped in that whole kind of scenario. So huge successes there. So when people talk to you about, hey, you need funding in order to become a beast, it may or may not be true depending on what you're doing. And then since leaving Unity, I was going to go back to consulting, saw huge opportunities with tech for market intelligence, research, and business planning. So I started developing systems to kind of improve what the big four consulting companies are doing with creating planning systems for companies to be more efficient, more successful, and really kind of hit those growth spurts. And what I ended up doing was creating a system called Minerva Engine, which does deep business intelligence. And now we're pivoting to employee performance actually with a program called Minerva First Light that focuses on both the intelligence to vet employees or even current roles in a company, and actually plan high impact initiatives that align with the overall strategies of the companies there. So it's a little bit of the different things I have my hands in at the moment, and it's been quite an adventure.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's what a lot of people first starting out don't realize is how complicated and illogical and unwieldy that adventure can be, going to all different areas and aspects of, you know, uh, life essentially. So yeah, it's good that you have so much experience to pull from. Um, I'm curious. So there's a couple cool conversations to have while we wait for people to ask questions. Post your questions in the text chat. I will relay them to Craig so you can get answers, feedback, advice, insights. Same if you're just working on something, you don't have a question yet, you don't know what to ask, just share what you're working on. We can go from there. If you're over here on Start Motto where we're hosting this, feel free to raise your hand or let me know in chat that you want to come up on stage and use your microphone to ask questions directly. You can also use your camera if you'd like. Um, yeah, while we wait for questions to come in, Craig, I'm curious. You said you're doing a pivot. A lot of people don't really know what a pivot is, and they also are unwilling to make pivots because they're very attached to what their initial idea is, what their vision is, And I'm curious, for you making a pivot, when it comes to doing that, what made you feel it was time? What were you looking for in terms of metrics and exercises that you're accomplishing, experiments that you're running tests for? What made you decide to make a pivot?
Yeah. Um, this is one of my favorite questions because I do think as a founder, having flexibility to understand how your vision actually operates in reality is super important. Um, One of the things that a lot of founders will run into, and this is actually what helped trigger the current pivot. Um, well, let me actually start with the initial vision of the company first. Was I'm going to leave the business operations of the things I was doing at Unity. I'm going to bring all of my intelligence of scaling these different companies and doing these different M&A integrations, and I'm going to become a super cool consultant. Now, that vision was um, amended after going back and redoing the consulting stuff, which was super successful. At one point in time, I was looking at, okay, AI is here out in the world, and there are a lot of things that I was doing with consulting before that has just become super efficient through some of the use of AI. So I knew that I had to reimagine what it meant to be a consultant in 2024 is when I kind of rebooted that whole effort. So I realized in order to actually achieve the vision that I wanted, I'd have to become a little more of a tech company than a consulting company. So that's where I became flexible there. Now, one of the things I started realizing, and this was through going to events, educating myself, working with clients, the whole entire realm of understanding what's valuable to customers. I realized that even the tech space in consulting is starting to become very saturated with a lot of companies doing the same things. So when I was looking at, let's say, M&A due diligence types of software, AI systems, report analytics, financial analytics, things like that, there are a lot of companies going after that. And when I first started, it didn't seem like there were necessarily because those AI systems were relatively new. It's kind of like blue ocean territory for those things. But even a year later, year and a half later, I still use those systems that do all this deep intelligence on companies, but where I went for the performance management kind of angle was that I saw huge problems with uh, employees, especially as there's a lot of companies doing pivots right now because of AI, different things. Even long-standing companies are realizing markets are starting to become saturated that seemed like they were kind of blue ocean territory before. Um, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the term blue ocean versus red ocean, one way to look at it is you have Blockbuster, right? They're renting out DVDs, renting out movies, and then you have West Coast Video, you have Hollywood Video, all these different stores, and all of a sudden it becomes saturated. A lot of companies are doing the exact same thing, very similar business model. So they're competing for DVD rental, you'd say. They're competing on price, but they're competing on availability maybe of different movies that are out there. So those kinds of things, they're all competing very much in the same exact area. Blue ocean is when a company like Netflix comes into play and they're like, we're going to focus on mailing out DVDs first, then we're going to focus on streaming. Now, no company, we saw how long it took for different companies like HBO and Disney and all those companies to start coming out with streaming platforms. So it took several years for that to become a red ocean. I'd say now it's starting to become a red ocean because everybody has their own platform, streaming platform, and people are starting to get agitated about it. There's just too much out there. And that's what market saturation is. So my pivot was partially because I saw that happening with consulting. Um, and it's not necessarily that it's the technology that I was building and the systems that I was building to grab this market intelligence and this company intelligence, that was all super valuable. That was actually the hard part was building a system that can go as deep as it was going into financial performance, biz dev performance, operational performance, and actual market expansion and customer acquisition performance. So, using that system and kind of shifting towards how can we make companies perform better. And one of the things that I found through talking to a lot of people was employees are the most expensive cost bucket in a company typically. It's massive unless it's a huge deep tech company. Maybe their R&D expenses and cloud expenses might be pretty high, but typically in most companies, one of the highest will be human capital. And getting the most out of human capital, whether it's through performance, whether it's through different efforts or initiatives that a company's doing, whether it's pursuing new technology and what systems need to be built for that technology, different things like that. I saw a huge opportunity. One of the kind of statements of the company is what we want to do is take a 90-day ramp time for an employee and cut it down into about 90 minutes in terms of getting that first initial impact on the company. And one of the first things is aligning with the company's main initiatives and efforts. And that's where the intelligence system combines with role impact. So that was an opportunity that I saw to really accelerate the value of employees at companies, whether they're new hires or new executives, and really kind of double down on that. And it's a very kind of blue ocean novel way to do this. So it's pretty cool, and right now it's in pilot mode, which is why it's like I'm learning a lot, getting a lot of feedback, and it's like every day there's something new, or it's like wow. But overall, the vision, even though it changed drastically over in terms of leading up to a pivot, it's one of those things where I was flexible enough to be able to explore it and say, hey, is there something here? Is this a direction to go in? And it's a little bit different than pivots in other companies. One thing that I would say is make sure your vision doesn't grow stale, because a vision can do that. And the thing with a founder or an executive at a company is that they're so in the thick of things that it's tough to see that your vision's growing stale when you're standing in the middle of it. That's why it's very important to discuss your vision, get feedback on it, and really educate yourself on where your customers are going and where the problem that you're solving is going.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that last part, especially because it's something that early founders really fall into a trap of not talking about what they're working on, trying to be stealth. Like, I don't know why the idea of being stealth became so popular. It's something that, really took root maybe like, what, 15 years ago? Like, you'd see every startup was stealth like back then, and everyone thought it was cool. But it quickly died out. But there's still so many people, more so the earlier, less experienced founders who still insist on being stealth. And usually it's because they're afraid that their idea is going to be taken. Like, who's going to take your idea? Why would anyone take your idea? It's unproven. No one knows exactly what the hell your idea is or what you mean by it, because it could be executed in a number of ways. And we talk about this all the time, right? The pancake recipe for blueberry pancakes. I give you that recipe, give that recipe to 100 other people. No one's going to turn out the same pancakes, because it's rare for a human being to follow the recipe exactly, but also the quality of ingredients that they have access to, the range of these things. It's impacting what the end result is of that execution, and the way that uh, executed recipe of blueberry pancakes will resonate with different people is going to be very diverse and across a wide gamut. So I love that you brought attention to that. Just don't be afraid. Share your vision. Talk about your vision. Showcase it to other people. See what fits, what people are resonating with, and get that advice, that feedback. We got a question from Andre Teonu over on LinkedIn. I posted it in the chat so you can read it too, Craig, but I'll read it out loud for people that are listening along. Hey, currently building a book summaries app called ReadSome, similar to Headway Blinkist. The market is already crowded with many book summaries apps. How could I differentiate myself from competitors while still being able to target the same user base? I currently have moved away from keynotes, takeaways, summary formats to narrative summaries that read more like a short story rather than a list of bullet points or takeaways. Also, I have worked a lot on improving the reading experience. No more scrolling, added pagination with justifiable text similar to Kindle. Currently, no app in this market has this. What the product is lacking that competitors have: summaries of fiction books, memoirs, and autobiographies. I decided to not target these categories as, in my opinion, this content is too personal and can't be summarized. Here's the landing page. Hopefully, it's not too long. All right, so there's a couple of little questions in here. Craig, what do you got?
Yeah, this is always a tough question because I love to tell everyone that market saturation doesn't matter, and um, if you believe enough in your app, it'll succeed. The reality of founders is that sometimes that's true and sometimes it isn't when a founder's building a company. But one thing that will always make a app or whatever is out there successful is being able to make customers want to use it and want to come back and become dependent on it for what they do throughout their daily life. One of the things that I could see helpful, putting that whole concept aside of can it be successful? I always think the answer is yes, but it's how flexible are you willing to be to make it get there, and where does the vision need to end up in order for there to be a clear path that will be the most successful path to have it grow. One of the things that, like I said, besides that I think will be useful is separating out what is going to develop into the vision, separate out features. So like you mentioned features in here, I would separate that out from the actual main problem that you're solving, because features are something that may or may not be useful for the app. Sometimes focusing on too many different features that are nice to haves is detrimental, and could actually it could harm the core value of the product itself. So when you think about the features that are most conducive to user happiness, user value, users coming back. Think about features that do that, but think of the essence of the app itself. What are you doing? And like you said, narrative summaries versus overviews, for example, like actually getting deeper into a better storytelling format, that could be it. I mean, people like to read, especially for the fiction audience, like to read that narrative story because stories really drive people's emotions. It immerses them in the content a lot better than just a Cliff Notes overview. So that might be your kind of core sales pitch for the customers is this isn't just an overview, it's going to engage you into the story itself, immerse you into the story, but then it becomes more of like a novella rather than this long novel or something like that. And I think there's absolutely value in that. Is that the number one selling point of your app? Maybe, maybe not. But that's different than features, right? Because that's the format that you are conveying the value of your product itself. So the narrative format is more of an attribute or a trait that your app has rather than just being a feature. Now, if you could switch between an overview or a narrative immersive format of the content, that would be a feature, right? Because you could switch between the two. So I'd say separating out those value propositions within the app itself and how users engage with it will be super important to getting you closer to that vision that differentiates your app compared to the other ones that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Andre, so you're building this. Do you have users yet? Let us know if you have users yet, and if you do, definitely schedule time to talk with them. Figure out how they're using your app, what they enjoy, why they felt compelled to try it, and what their background motivations were seeking it out, finding it, downloading it, adding it, to their library and using it, and try to dig into the expectations they had for your app before they even started using it and where those came from, right? Because they've been using other apps, and this is important as a experience designer, a product developer. You want to do your best to meet the expectations that people have already that are established with existing products or services, brands, companies in the marketplace already. If you try to introduce things that are too future, futuristic and innovative, even if they're delivering more benefits or easier access to the same benefits, the experience people are having with those things could not or could end up being frustrating, uncomfortable, not fun because it's too far removed from what their expectations are currently. So this is where versioning comes in, and be aware of these types of things. But it sounds like you're trying to look at what people are already doing and trying to build on that. But always, like Craig said, you want to have these conversations. You want to learn from these people. I'm gonna be looking for your comments in LinkedIn. 0 users currently. Hopefully, it will launch in 1 to 2 months. Okay. Uh, Andre also says thank you. So Kindle-like reading experience is more like a feature, not a selling point, right? Craig, what do you say about that?
Um, the piece of the Kindle reading experience, more
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
here I'll
feature
post it.
than.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, let me take a quick look here. Uh, okay, so then I guess my biggest question would be why this app versus versus Cliff Notes versus the other ones that were up there. Was it Blinkist and some of the other ones? When somebody asks why this app, why you, I mean, it's a scary question. I know when people, so I used to write a lot and I pitch to agents a lot, and one of the scariest questions that agents might ask sometimes or publishers might ask is, why are you the best person to write this book? And that's a really scary question when somebody asks why. It's much different than how are you going to write this book so that it stands out, or different things like that. So when a investor or yourself as a founder or someone asks why this app versus the other ones that are out there, um, you want to think about that white space that makes yours, that where you're fitting yours in, that will really hit a home run for users or have that aha moment. Like, now I get why this is the app versus the other ones. So for Kindle, if the Kindle experience is a feature, a lot of um, people may flock to something because of a feature, but not usually, right? People flock to something because of the core essence of what it is providing, because features can be emulated by other companies fairly easy. Now, if that's why I say user experience is often a core strategic moat or strategic advantage for a company, or I should say rather competitive advantage. It's harder to replicate in certain fashions than just a simple feature. So a feature might be something like uh hmm, I'm trying to think in terms of like which closely relates to this app, but I'm not as familiar with the different Kindle apps and everything. But I'd say look at the the core essence of the app. Like I said, that'll fill in that white space of why this app, that's harder to replicate than a feature. Um, because it'll be that main gravitational point that customers understand, and they understand it right away. It should take about a sentence to describe of like why your app and not Blinkist. And if it was narrative summary, no other companies out there are necessarily doing narrative summary. That could almost be like a more featureized now. I don't know if featureized is a word, but with AI out there, how it is creating an easier space to create a narrative summary rather than just an overview, like perspective on the material itself. But I would say look at, and you might want to talk to customers. And I'd say A/B testing is also something super important to do with some of this stuff where it's like with the product, whether it's part of the interface or part of the reading style or whatever it is, A/B test and say to your customers, ask them, what do you prefer, A or B, in terms of the style, in terms of this feature. The thing about A/B testing is that you could do it on a single feature, but what you really want to do is grab feedback, A/B test the core value proposition of your app at this point, I would say. And think about MVP, the minimum viable product. Instead of thinking about all these different features it can have, it could get complicated in that sense where too much flexibility for the customer is counterproductive. When people go to In and Out to grab a cheeseburger or a double double, they have maybe six or seven things on their menu, but their line is always backed up all the way to the end. And it's because that core value proposition that they have, everybody knows what that burger and fries is going to taste like. That's what brings them there. They don't need all these fancy things. They don't need a 20-page menu. The core value proposition is what sells it. And I think it's going to be important to figure that out before the giant array of features.
I love that. Hopefully that's helpful to you. We've got a lot more people joining us over on LinkedIn and Twitch and YouTube. So welcome everyone. As I just posted in the text chat, we've got we're looking for your questions. So use the text chat to share them. What you're working on, what questions you have, I'll relay those to Craig as I'm about to do right now. Welcome Science, thank you. Yeah, as I said, over to Naparun on Twitch. Hello from USA to you in Finland. And again, bummer about the Finnish men's team going down like that, but hopefully they'll come back. Big fan of Joel Armia. I'm so bad at that. And those jerseys are beautiful. So, okay, new questions we got. We've got Kokimi over on YouTube asked, should we prioritize user experience over performance? And Craig, I'm pretty sure those two are intertwined. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's actually what I was just going to say. The better the user experience, typically that's because of high performance of the app. There's minimal friction. So I would say there's a couple different things that really make the experience well. And I'm not like interface designer, web designer, or anything like that. So there's definitely people that have a more technical approach to talking about user experience in terms of how they're doing design and different user stories and things like that for the actual development. But I would say um, a couple things I always like to focus on from a business side, especially from where I come in working with the apps, because I like to get to know the companies and their apps that I work with so that I can align the business model with what they've actually built. But I would say reduce friction as much as possible. I think I brought this up here before where the more clicks, the more information that user has to input, all these different things is a little speed bump. And users hate speed bumps. They hate to constantly have to brake. They want to go, go, go. And they want to feel like the app is actually not only reducing friction, but I'm going to add the other angle of a positive user experience, which is acceleration. So it reduces friction, but it also accelerates whatever they're doing. So if they're doing something like with what SyncSketch did, which is provide it's a remote collaboration tool for graphic designers and animators and game designers. And one of the big things that did was drastically speed up people's ability to start sharing notes, sharing information, sharing links. So everything that you do with your app should allow a user to do whatever they're doing faster in a more compre uh, not comprehensive, but a more um, uh, a more reasonable, logical approach to how they're navigating through your system. So for the last example, the reading summary app, whether it's narrative or whatever, one of the things that could help a company like that expand usage, that's another thing I look for is kind of organic growth in apps through either sharing links or inviting users in a super non-friction kind of format. If I could share part of a narrative summary with someone, or I had so many shares of a narrative summary to invite people and experience that app as well. That makes me feel like my experience is expanded because I love helping people out. So if I could share information with someone and bring them to an app, I'm like, that's awesome. And people get to experience this app that I love and that I'm experiencing. And then those people are like, well, this is awesome. I'm going to sign up. But then maybe I don't have as many shared or limited shares, depending on the business model. You don't want to inhibit growth by adding limitations like that. I'm just using an example where, like, think about your business model. Maybe somebody has so many shares of a full book on one tier that they have of your product and they can upgrade, and then there could be discussion rooms or whatever about the narrative or the story that's in there in that app. Just thinking outside of the box of like different ways to increase adoption, because the whole thing, part of the user experience is that initial adoption, and then making sure that once a user experiences and are in your interface or app or you're experiencing your service, that the performance part meets the requirements for who your target audience is. So for Sync Sketch, it was with graphic designers, directors of animation, and their animators. So all of the tools within this app had to meet the requirements of a designer from a company like DreamWorks or Netflix or Skydance Animation or any of those big studios that might be using this. It couldn't be like drawing a picture on Paint, Microsoft Paint, or something like that. It had to be legit graphic design tools that animators would actually use in in actual in the studio, sitting next to their buddy who's overseeing the work that they're doing and things like that. So that's part of the user experience, and make it intuitive for your user. So definitely have a user in mind and talk to them frequently to understand what their requirements are.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good stuff. So my background's in experience design, so I'll fill in or add on a little bit to this. So definitely contextualize again what your intended customers are already doing. So you understand what those expectations are. Like Craig just said, you talk to them, but you can also sit down with them and watch how they do things in their current workflows, right? See what they do to achieve a certain outcome or obtain a certain benefit to what you're trying to offer them through your alternative service product, right? And short of that, you can ask them what tools they already use, and then you take the role of trying to accomplish that yourself and map each step along the way in the user flow, in the workflow, so you understand what kind of menus these people are already seeing all the time, right? That's where things become more intuitive through your design because you're matching their expectations with what you're providing them, right? So build on that. And then as in terms of like the initial question, performance versus user experience. Like Craig said, they're intertwined completely. But if you're meeting the bare minimum performance necessary for them, you can get away with a lot of performance issues by providing them a better experience with other aspects of the product, and more than that, your interactions with them, how you're building relationships with your customer base individually, right? Showing them that you're listening, you care, You want feedback. You're weighing that feedback and you're making informed decisions about how you're applying that to improve the product for that individual, but also the larger user base that you have. These little things, building community around your brand, around your company, your product, your service, is one of the most defensible things you can do outside of like very specific IP that, on its own right, like there's so much IP that's just sitting on shelves that's not commercialized, does nothing. But if you're able to build a relationship with these people, you don't need IP because you're still able to service these people and build a relationship where they keep coming back to give you money and work with you, right? So be aware of the different aspects of your business, of your brand, that's able to influence the experience that these people are having with your product and service and allows them to have more leeway knowing that, hey, this is an early stage product. We're in a beta test. We just launched. We're still working through these things, but we want your support. We want to learn from you. We want to service you and provide you with the best product, best service we could ever possibly accomplish. But we're not quite able to do that yet, but we want you a part of that journey. And that's what early adopters are. So be aware of all that. Okay, more questions. Next, we've got green latency over on YouTube, I believe. I am building a video AI product to generate highlights of long-running sports footage. It's tech heavy. How do I acquire my first customer? That's an interesting one.
Um, that is a good question. First, I would think about who, based on what you are creating, who is your best customer? Um, is it a particular sport? Is it any sport? Um, is it a casual watcher that maybe missed a game and they want to see some highlights, or is it someone who's more a fan of team history and wants to see highlights throughout the years for a team? So there's a couple different ways to go about it, but I'd say who is, based on the way you're designing your app or looking to go to market, who is your number one customer? And then I would weigh the model of how are you monetizing it. So if you were to monetize it, how is your number one customer going to use it, and how are they expected and I'm not saying start with, you should always start with monetization in mind. That doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a freemium model, because I'm a huge fan of freemium models, because it to me is one of the best ways to get your first group of customers. So I would say keep in mind the long term on how a user is going to get monetized, because that will help you figure out, okay, if I'm starting with a freemium model where maybe there's so many highlights for free before a user has to adopt kind of their actual pricing tier that they end up going on. But in that kind of format, I think it's important to look at the expectation of consumption and usage, and how frequently they're expected to use it, and what the actual highest value proposition there is of the app. So if they're paying monthly for different highlights of a particular sport, then their business is going to be seasonal, most likely, because sports have seasons. So they operate part of the year. So that's another thing to think about when adopting customers. And that will actually help you figure out, when do you want to start adopting your first customers? Because if it's something seasonal that's for a particular sport, and let's say it's coming up on football season, when you're going to want to release this to start adopting, you'll want to be able to prove concept to a customer of this before football season, which means your highlights might need to be from previous seasons, not just current games, so that they can get a feel for what this app is, so that by the time football season rolls around, they can start using the app to get more current highlights for, like I said, that depends on if it's for based on highlights for current games that the casual user may have missed or kind of historical games that have happened years ago. So all those different things to think about when acquiring your first customer, and that kind of helps answer the who and why. Why is someone using this, and who's using it, and when are they going to use it? So all those who, where, what, why, when type of questions for the customer is important, but also the adoption. I love freemium models. If there can be a way to give so much value for free to hook someone in and then really have a big, and it's part of understanding the customer, figuring out when their tipping point is of when it becomes, okay, I no longer expect this to be free. I will put in money to get this next level experience from this app or this system or this service. So always think about that with your customer adoption. But a lot of people when answering that question might think of how do I market this to get customers, and my answer almost 100% of the time to a app or a startup coming out with a product is don't market. It's wasting money. Figure out your customer first, get your first customers, understand who you need to market to and how by getting your first customers, and then figure out marketing after the fact.
No, yeah, I agree with that big time. It's something we see all the time with the earlier stage founders, early stage companies is, yeah, they're skipping critical steps, like foundational steps. Start like putting money into marketing, and like you said, they don't know who they're targeting. They don't know how to find them, how to speak to them, how to convince them to get the product, to pay for the product, any of that. And yeah, I mean, going back, how do you get that first client, first customer without doing the marketing? Well, it starts with relationships. You need to figure out who you know that has some inroad to a potential buyer of what your product or service is. And either see if you can get an introduction, if it's like a secondary connection, or if it's someone you already know, you know them. Offer to take them out for, coffee, for dinner, whatever. Hang out. Take them to a sports game, right? A match. Like, go spend some time with them and share what you're working on. And, you know, like, while you're still building stuff, it's really important to facilitate these relationships, foster authentic relationships with these people by seeking them out as mentors first, not customers. Don't be pitching them. Just be asking them for advice, for feedback, for insights. Ask them to share their opinions, their experiences that they have with trying to, like, do this again, accomplish this outcome and obtain these benefits that you're offering through the means that already exist. How are they doing already today? Why are they doing like that? What are their frustrations? What are, like, the moments of excitement and deliverance of getting something that they wanted from these other things? And use that as research to inform, not only are you building something that people actually are going to want and be willing to pay for, but that who you're selling to, and you understand their motivations, their agenda, their expectations and everything. So this is really great. Green
Yeah.
Latency added into the chat. I was thinking more from a broadcasting agency's point of view, not really direct to consumers, but this too, like Craig, when you're talking about earlier, we started the conversation off about pivots and how you realized it was time for you to make a pivot. Um, Something that, like, we didn't talk about, and when you're making a pivot, and I think this is important for everyone to be aware of, when you pivot, typically the vision changes, right? But the mission, the values, and the culture, those three things typically are staying the same. Maybe little minor tweaks, but those things stay the same because whatever vision you have, whatever product or service, they can still support the same mission. They can still represent the same values and represent the same culture and align with these things with others that you're trying to service. So anyhow, Craig, those are a couple extra little, like,
Yeah.
things. What do you got?
With With that addition of, the broadcasting agencies, that's definitely different because that becomes more of a B2B than a B2C kind of, and that's business to business versus business to consumer. So the B2B format, I would say one thing that's super helpful for founders to do as they're trying to lock in their first customers is start off with feedback conversations. Say to someone, connect with someone that works at a broadcast agency who might be a relatively solid decision maker or end user for your product. Typically, start with an end user, someone who would get the value proposition and would just kind of be able to give you the best feedback possible, and link up with them and say, "Hey, I'm creating a system that does XYZ. We're super early stage." You don't even need to get into that and sound too formal about it, but just say, "Hey, we're really looking for feedback, and what we are curious if we be able to pick your brain." People love to give feedback on things because it helps them, it allows them to shape the product. And as you're just asking for feedback, it's going to be easier to sell your product to them as you refine it because they feel like they helped build it with you essentially, since they've provided feedback and you help build the product to be able to facilitate their needs. It becomes a much easier, I'd say, it opens the door for customer acquisition for that particular thing. And especially when it's B2B and you're looking for studios, there's not 100 billion studios out there. It's not like B2C. There's maybe a couple of big ones, and maybe it only takes two or three big studios to all of a sudden hit profitability or enough revenue where you're like, you got it and you can scale and get there. So look for those relationships where you can get in with the right studio, get feedback from them first, and then really help take the relationship from there. And think of it as a relationship. Don't think of them as a customer too early. Think of it as relationship building.
Exactly. It's all about the relationships, and it's also about thinking over the long term, not about the immediate like sale, 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 but how are you laying a foundation to build upon and open up opportunities for you as you progress and as you're learning and evaluating and making these changes and pivots. Okay, so we got three more questions coming in. We've got, what was this one? So Antonio Santillo over on LinkedIn asked, "It's exciting to see tokenization moving from concept to real regulatory clarity. This evolution can truly redefine access, efficiency, and transparency in capital markets. How do you think this will impact asset liquidity and investor opportunities in the next few years? For those exploring innovative approaches to alternative asset strategies, there are great perspectives emerging related to markets worth exploring." I'm sure there's an agenda behind this question, but Craig, what are your opinions?
It sounds like there's an agenda behind this question, Antonio. I think you know about this better than I do. You should be up here pitching this. But I mean, my own take on tokenization is one of caution. Uh, with things like that. I mean, as an investor myself, I like investing in things that are super impactful, like biotech companies that are coming out with cures for stuff and seem like they're really on track. I will invest in that and put my money in something like that. Uh, some people say, "Oh, that's not as risky of an asset as something like Bitcoin or things like that, or tokenization for." Let's say, I know one big thing that's been coming up is tokenizing oil and things like that for different things, and I would proceed with caution because regardless of the regulatory stance on some of these things, and even with regular stocks and things like that, there's pump and dumps, there's incongruencies between intrinsic value and the uh the the more, I don't want to call it inflated value. There's undervalued assets too, and it's really measuring the risk and reward. If a stock price does not, or an asset price in general, does not match the risk reward, my first thing is proceed with caution. Um, in terms of what I feel with how I'm accumulating assets. So this isn't financial advice at all. I'd always just say proceed with caution, do due diligence. But I think it'll be pretty easy to see once tokenization happens with different things. Like uh, let's use the example of oil because I know that's been brought up in the news a lot recently. It'll be pretty easy to see, like, okay, how does tokenization of this shift away from the actual um, ownership, manufacturing, supply chain of oil itself? Like, if there's not a whole lot changing there, but there's a whole lot changing with the fluctuation in terms of the tokenization and value of somebody's assets that they're holding there, regardless of what they say the regulatory rules are, the system doesn't have to necessarily have the intrinsic value of something out there. And it might not match the risk versus reward at the end. So I don't know. Those are things that I consider with it all. But
Yeah, I appreciate the wise advice of concern and staying away from some of that stuff. Yeah, I'm of the same mindset. So much of that stuff is, you know, very overhyped and fads and romanticizing technology that's still incredibly immature, um, and ultimately used by grifters and scammers because there's a lot of ways for them to take advantage of that and people and other people's romanticization of the technology. So yeah, typically, be careful. It's the number one thing. um, Mia Baden asks, I tried to market on TikTok and had to delete my profile because the users that I got were part of the Pakistani army or something. What is the best way to market online? Would it be spamming business owners on LinkedIn? Okay, so it sounds like I don't know if it like, Pakistani army exactly, but I've done some stuff on TikTok. I've been around a lot of socials and stuff, and a lot of the more popular socials, they're overrun with a lot of bot farms and, people trying to make it seem like, yeah, advertising that you're doing, the marketing you're doing is generating good results, and they just, flood you with bots. So it sounds like that's kind of what happened there. So yeah, what's the best way to market online? Would it be spamming business owners on LinkedIn? I assume to DM them. What are your thoughts on that?
so I wouldn't use the word spamming in anything because it's usually not quite as effective. But it depends who your customer is really for how the best way to market to them, and that goes everything from the platform that you're on and marketing through to the mode. And I would go back to the basics in communication there. I wouldn't overcomplicate it. The basics of communication are mode, messaging, things like that. The communication style. So know your end user super well. Figure out where they're going to be. They might be on LinkedIn. If there's somewhere else that's better, it might be a better platform to market to. And I wouldn't spam. I think it was a lot easier to spam people on LinkedIn, or I shouldn't say easier. It's easier now because AI can just come up with a message and send it out to like 1,000 different LinkedIn users or 20,000 different LinkedIn users, and you only need to click one button to do that now, basically. So I would say 100% of the messages that I get that are done like that, I ignore. I'm sure other people are the same way. So I don't know that spamming through LinkedIn is necessarily the best way. One thing that I used to do when I was running some of the LinkedIn stuff for Sync Sketch back when they were a startup, and it was literally the founders and myself managing some of the LinkedIn accounts because we didn't have a marketing team at the time. Um, I think conversations with the right people in the right groups are the best way to get in front of your audience, and then take the conversation from there. Um, it's more organic that way, and it's less spammy, and you actually understand your customer base a little bit better because you're reading the conversations that they're in, and you end up, if you become one of them, it's a lot easier to communicate and a lot easier to become visible. And that helps create that genuine visibility that's more meaningful. And it just makes the selling journey a lot easier. It reduces friction, it reduces the guard a little bit better rather than in a message or an email out of left field from someone that they automatically assume you don't know about their problems because they don't know who you are. So keep that in mind when you're marketing. So um, yeah, I think the best way to market is contingent on your customer, who they are, where they are, and how they communicate with other professionals in their network.
Yeah, I mean, a common theme that comes up all the time doing these is context. Context is the key to everything. You need to establish the correct context, starting with yourself, and that goes back to those, like, defining documents, those guiding principle documents. What's your mission? What are your values? What's your culture that you represent? And then figuring out who that aligns with in relation to the experience that you're providing them, which should be enjoyable for them because you've done your research, you understand how to produce something that's enjoyable for them to interact with, to experience, right? And capable of providing them benefits. And that's where value is being created. And more value is being created when it's more enjoyable, it's more beneficial, and it also aligns more with them. And that's why, like, you see a lot of people pushing back on certain corporations because their values and their actions don't align with their customer base. And it could be that the stated mission aligns with the mission and values of the customer base, but the actions that the company is taking has now deviated from what they said they're, representing, and they don't represent anymore. A classic one's Google, right? Google, when they launched, do no evil. They abandoned that like a while ago, and they've been doing a lot of evil shit since then, right? So be aware of these things, and then take that the next step and start focusing on your intended customer. Create different target customer profiles that you think are going to be most excited to learn about your offering, enjoy it, enjoy experiencing it more than anyone else, benefit from it more than anyone else, and value it more than anyone else. Again, in alignment with your defined guiding principles: mission, values, culture. Okay? Hopefully that helps too, building on what Craig said, which is wonderful. We're coming up on time, so last call for questions. Post them in the chat. Hopefully Craig can get them. We got one more on the queue. At Science MBG asks, I am finishing my PhD on biochemistry and bioinformatics. Is there any recommendation for a field to work on in free time for the future? I'm experimenting now, building something mostly. What do you got?
Oh boy. So a field as in I'm curious like the angle of this question, what it's meant by field in terms of, are you looking to do something still with biochemistry but on like a different scale, like maybe more technology involved with it or something like that, or more of kind of like a pivot for your personal career where you're doing a side project and looking to get into development of um like an application or a technology or something like that. um are you able to provide a little more context around the question for what you're looking to do, science MBG?
Yeah. We'll wait for that. We got other questions while we're waiting for more context. John Rice says, "Thanks, guys. Have a simple question. With a small marketing team, what should be the focus to grow my app? A brand LMM visibility tool. Curious what your thoughts are." Okay, so this is another one you can add more context to, John. What's your goal with growing your app? What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Is that more revenue, more customers? Is that growing the size so you can hire more people? Are you trying to raise money? What's the goal with your marketing team? And science added more context. We're waiting for more context from John. Let me copy this over to you, Craig. All right. So science adds. I am working on omics, proto-omics per se. I build 2 websites now. Right now, learning more the websites, but I want work on analysis of omics data with AI with ease. That went over my head.
Yeah, I know. This is a little outside of my knowledge with the biotech industry, but I would say it sounds like you're at kind of like an experimental stage where you know that there is some kind of value that an LLM could have or AI could have with the data that is coming off these studies or these different practices in this field. And I think a lot of biotech companies right now are realizing that. Even the big ones, you look at the Bristol Myers Squibbs and the Amgens and the GlaxoSmithKlines and the Mercs, they're all starting to create these proprietary tools that are helping them analyze data, hypothesize what will happen with certain trials and studies and reactions between different proteins and things that they're doing. So, I mean, it gets pretty intense. Definitely way over my head with my MBA. Didn't get too much into the science field with that stuff, but there is a lot of potential, and I think there's a lot of blue ocean potential. As I was talking about blue ocean earlier, some novel ways that are going to be super impactful and have kind of new monetization potential and different ways in the industries. And I would say definitely explore it deeper, both from an aspect of what's the state of the industry now, and you can even come up with a prompt for like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever LLM you like using, and ask it like, give me a state of the industry for what is it called, omics. So like ask for like a state of technology and like how it's evolving and how it's evolved over the past decade or so. And then you could start questioning like, okay, so where is it going from here? And it may or may not give, when you ask LLMs about the future, sometimes it's garbage, sometimes it's interesting or inspirational, and sometimes you got to work with it to help spark ideas for yourself that actually come from where you see the industry being familiar with it. And then I'd say start messing around with analytics tools. I know my brother works for a pharmaceutical company, and he started building little tiny apps that would just do automation steps, and he's not a very technical person. So it was just a way to build his skills on these different things so that he could be like, "Oh, this is cool. This has a little impact here when I do this stuff." If you want to get deeper to the analytics of it, though, of scientific data, and scientific studies, um, I mean, that's really cool. I would think about frameworks. Think about everything as a framework. So if you're analyzing data, how does that data need to be analyzed? Also include regulatory type of info if things need to be defined in certain ways or need to be mapped out certain ways because of regulations and things like that in biotech. Consider that stuff and run tests. I mean, explore the unknown, I'd say.
No, I love that. Like, again, something that gets overlooked by a lot of early stage founders, less experienced founders, or even just career professionals, people in general. So much of this is just a series of experiments. And the purpose is to learn and grow and test your assumptions, test those hypotheses, and see what actually works out and is validated? And if not, what can you learn from that? And I hate the phrase fail fast. I say this all the time because it's teaching people that failure is okay, failure is bad. If you follow lean methodology and you've got sound project management system in place working within lean methodology, you're consistently running these little small experiments and you're always learning and you're always growing, and you also have enough resources, both like, tangible resources, but also, you know, your mind, your physical, mental being intact enough to continuously move forward and conduct more experiments to grow and learn and hopefully avoid failure and avoid costly mistakes, avoid risk, avoid sacrifices that are completely unnecessary to achieving success. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some of these things for sure. We had more context from John with John's small marketing team. Their focus is more customers and growing the monthly recurring revenue. So you kind of touched on a little bit of this already with approaching marketing to help a company grow. But is there anything else you can add to this?
Yeah, for sure. So with monthly recurring revenue, there's several ways to increase this, right? And the basics, when you look at net MRR, you're going to look at new user growth. You're going to look at expansion growth, so that's growth from existing users, and then you're going to look at churn as well, which is users that drop out. And there's uh, one thing that I want to lead with going into this is that there's a saying. I think it goes, as soon as a metric becomes the goal, it's a bad goal. So your goal is not to just increase MRR, it's to really dig deep onto what the customer's needs are that will make them spend more money each month, or will reduce churn so that those customers that would typically leave will stay and start spending more money each month. So that deals with the value that the products are offering and its ability to captivate people. The stat monthly recurring revenue will indicate how well you're doing that. But if you just focus on increasing MRR at all costs, you could start doing crazy things with one customer that hurts a bunch of other customers and things like that. So just comprehend and think about how you're actually growing monthly recurring revenue. So to reduce churn, think about and even ask, try to get data. Why are customers leaving? Because if you have very high churn, you'll need a lot of revenue from new customers and expansion customers in order to keep them. But the thing that stat, that metric, churn, will shed light on is, why are customers leaving? Are they not the right type of customer? Does your app not fulfill their problem? Is there an opportunity that you're not seizing that's causing churn because a customer had different expectations for the value that you're offering or the service you're offering? So think about all that stuff with churn. Or is it user experience, like we talked about earlier, where there's just too much friction for someone to get into it? They try it and leave because the performance level isn't there. So all of that will have to do with churn. I think the new customer revenue will have to do with the sales cycle for sure, and your ability to pilot or demo and very quickly have the right messaging. And that's the kind of the user acquisition costs. Think about CAC. You'll want to look at cost of acquiring customers with that. And when you're acquiring customers, you want to determine, am I spending money to acquire customers that's not having a big impact? Stop doing it. If you're wasting money, just stop wasting money, and look for ways to really kind of hit home runs with the customers that you're targeting and marketing with. And that's all part of that sales funnel where you want to accelerate it. You want to move fast in the right direction with the right customers and get them onboarded as fast as possible. The most powerful out of any type of monthly recurring revenue metric, I do believe, is expansion revenue. Not only the ability to acquire customers, but the ability to get them to increase their spending with you from 1 month to the next. That's the most powerful because it means they're not churning. It means you're increasing the value of your app as they use it. And it means that you're putting the right mechanisms in place to either adopt more users under a single account or to increase their spending either through features, leveling them up on different tiers of a product, or increasing usage and consumption. So that's why expansion is super cool. If there's a metric to brag about, I would say expansion revenue is the big one.
Cool insights. I like that. Um, John added a couple more little comments added in the chat. So to give more context, just crossed 12,000 monthly recurring revenue and mostly agency focused. Congrats on that. That's huge. Churn has
Yeah.
been low. Yeah, we have been really focused on leveraging AI to implement feedback quickly. Good job. Most churn has been education focused since it is a fairly new space, and of course many competitors in the space that fits their needs a bit more for just single brands.
Okay, so I imagine education focus is, you mean like the bucket of customers who are in the education sector
I think John
or
means
others, or
educating the users. I think helping them. I think most churn's about education focused. Maybe I don't know. Maybe.
I so I'll tackle it both ways, because both. So if it has to do with educating the customers about the product, in order to keep them from leaving, it could be the either friction with being able to adopt the product quickly and get to that value proposition, so that they can experience the value rather than have to be educated about the value of it. The faster somebody can actually experience the intended result of your product, the better. So it might be collapsing that initial kind of new customer initial ramp up period. And it's almost, I'll draw a parallel to with my product, which is to, like I mentioned earlier, for employee performance and onboarding, be able to collapse 90 days into 90 minutes worth of information needed to start impacting the company. You want to provide that experience to your customer instead of the traditional, however long it's going to take them to start being able to get value from the product and to learn about it and learn the best way to use it. You want to collapse that down and look at everything that's creating an extended initial, I'd say look at the first couple of days, the first week, the first month of your user experience, and look at everything that's slowing down and figure out ways to launch users to value faster. And if educating users on the product is kind of that gap, that's user experience and it's ease of use of the product, and you need to look for ways to improve that so that it's not an obstacle and is rather an accelerator, like we talked about earlier with that design experience.
Yeah, John was just adding clarity. It's a LLM visible. It's in the LLM visibility space. The education is around how it works. So yeah, that was the proper one.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Cool.
good. All right, cool. Mia had a question. Mia asked, "How did you come up with the pricing model for your company?" A good one.
Yeah. um the There are a couple things that decide that. I'd say I've gone through several pricing changes and tiering changes with SaaS companies. Sometimes it's a natural evolution, and sometimes it's a wake up call where it's like, hey, if we want to be profitable, like we need to figure out either how to increase the value proposition of the product so that we can price it into a profitability kind of bucket, or we need to change our monetization model. I think monetization is something that is best built into the product early on. Build it into the mindset, think about the usage, how it's being used, where the biggest value is, and think about the customer who's going to be using certain features or the product in a certain way, because some users might need to be monetized differently. So I can give you an example for products like Sync Sketch that are a graphic design tool. It's a SaaS tool. Monthly users are how it's monetized. Um, we went through some pretty big pricing changes. A lot of SaaS companies did around then, especially with inflation and how much cloud costs were increasing at the time and different things going on and the development costs. And founders often price their products super low initially because they want usage. They like giving their products away for free, but it's not necessarily sustainable. I think it's good to do that initially because it builds a customer base, and that's the most important thing is to get people using the product. But you have to think about pricing. So if you find, like, let's say your product initially is priced at $5 and it's intended for schools using your product, they're going to be very price sensitive compared to, let's say, like large studios that were using Sync Sketch. So when we're going through and saying, hey, our initial users were in the education sector, but our enterprise users are going to be at studios, the MGMs and the Netflixes and the Hulus and things like that, you're going to want to look at how do we monetize them differently than schools. So that's where you have different tiers, different plans, different ways to price, but you have to look at the features, the actual value you're offering to those customers. So for studios, security is huge for them. Um, you look at their different feature sets, whether it's integrations into other apps, things that are high development costs for you, keep those on the higher tiers. Allow your users that are willing to pay for those to pay for those, um, and logically tier things downward for the other users on different plans. But also keep in mind the number of tiers you have. Too many tiers gets complicated. People don't like to make too many different decisions. But if you only have a super small tier and then a super expensive tier, it's kind of jarring and it's just like, whoa, there's no way the expensive tier is actually that valuable in terms of what it's offering if it's so different than the next tier below it. So look at how your users will tier up as well if you're in a SaaS company, because a great sales, marketing, and expansion revenue. This is what creates good expansion revenue is being able to tier up customers so that they start spending more and more and more after they experience their initial entry point into the company and things like that, into your product. So keep all that stuff in mind with pricing. Look at competitors out there, but don't only consider competitors at the same time. You do you because unless you're in a just a red ocean and you're selling nails and hammers and everybody else around you is selling nails and hammers, you're going to compete on price and it's going to hurt every company. It's kind of that race to the bottom with certain things. But if you're differentiated enough, you shouldn't run into that problem. But also, kind of like words of wisdom that I've seen catastrophes happen with companies is trying to force a model, a monetization model into a company that doesn't work. So one of these is consumption, where users pay per, let's say, like AI token used or something like that. With AI, okay, that can make sense. With something that's a SaaS company that should be based on users, if you force a consumption kind of model into that, it will buckle. It will either make you lose money or it will annoy your customers and they will leave. I've seen that happen. Both those instances happen. So do things that are logical, that seem fair for the customer, And you can even get creative with it. If you look at Slack, one of Slack's big monetization things was only pay for what you use. So if certain users using Slack go inactive, you don't have to pay for them for the time that they're inactive. You will actually get credited, and um, it'll go towards users that are using or new users that you adopt when one user goes inactive. I don't know if they're still doing that, but customers love that. And it increased adoption because companies knew that they could just scale up or scale down with usage. And it was a great mechanism. So think about creative things like that that will allow customers to increase usage, increase adoption. And if you keep adoption high and keep usage high, then you just need to price it correctly and create the right model and you'll be all right.
Yeah, a lot of, again, like just beautiful insights. You got people saying, great insights. Glad that I showed up. So we're happy you showed up too. And yeah, Mia added a couple other things. She's like, talking about how cloud is their big expense right now. Mentioned that they use AI. I asked Mia how that's impacting, their options, especially when it comes to like monetization and pricing strategies and everything. So we'll see if she adds anything. Oh no, Mia says no. I'm gonna use that 100%. Perfect. All right, good. I'm glad it was
Yeah.
helpful. But yeah, I
With
mean, yeah, go.
just real fast with AI, one of the big things, and you may have heard this, I've seen a couple articles on there, and I think they're really right, where there's kind of two models that will work in the short term right now. Um, One of them is consumption, where like tokens, because otherwise companies will go broke if users could just run rampant over how much they're using it. That model I don't like quite as much because it's harder to measure. So, from a procurement perspective, if a company is adopting a solution and it's based on consumption, there's always this like, okay, well, if we're paying upfront for so many tokens, we have to measure, are we going to blow past that? Like, what's the thing? Then there's stop and go, there's negotiation, there's all this stuff. Sometimes that's great and it's healthy and it benefits both companies in the long run, but it does create some friction in the procurement process and sales process there, and sometimes customer success. But the other thing is impact based, and that's like what my company um, prices. We know our AI usage, the number of tokens, and the different systems that we use are going to end up being roughly the same cost from project to project. So what we price everything as is value based on for like the role impact performance planning system we use. We'll tier up per role. So, like a manager role might be different than a VP or director level role because it's actually the value that's being provided to the company for certain roles. Um, and we know our usage will be similar across those roles. So it helps manage costs on our end while pricing for the value we're actually offering the company. So that's a way to kind of steer away from tokenized usage and that kind of flex pricing or consumption pricing and get a more standardized value based pricing model.
Awesome. Mia says, I think you solved our $1 million question. Well, it's like our biggest expense, so expense by use is good. All right. So awesome. Cool. Okay, so there's one more question, and then I think we should call it because we're over time. You're amazing. Gave us an extra 30 minutes. So, Salman, A official, asks for comments on a service business and sales and lead gen for agency founders in Pakistan. So it's a very, wide, broad question, but I think there's a couple things that we see often in all these different online communities and, just out and about using LinkedIn. There's a never ending supply of incoming messages from people trying to sell you leads and support services about sales and lead gen. And, you know, I'm curious your thoughts if Salman is trying to run a business like this and stand out. What suggestions do you have?
Can you repeat the initial question again? The way it was written.
It's up here in the chat, but it's
Okay.
they're asking specifically for comments on a service business and sales and lead gen for agency founders in Pakistan.
Okay. So I'm not too familiar with specific Pakistan and how the local kind of uh, practices impacted too much, but I mean, for agency marketing and stuff like that, I think the biggest thing that I see, because I mean, it is very saturated when you look at the different agencies that are marketing online. It's super saturated. I'll say when I go to conferences and different areas, the biggest things I see lately are marketing agencies that are um, looking at that kind of social performance kind of marketing, but also the second biggest is staffing for outsourcing to like Latin America and the Philippines and areas like that. Those are the two that I see a lot of. So you're definitely in a saturated market. But I would look at what value can you also help provide the company that other marketing agencies aren't necessarily providing in the same way. Um, One of the best would be getting the company in the right place at the right time with the right customers. So if you're able to lock in on specific, whether it's industry events that are being advertised online on different social media platforms, and you have a system that's able to get your client into those conversations in the right way and really start impacting those customers, that to me is like one of my favorite social um I guess social value propositions for agencies to connect the customers and the systems. What's this? I saw there's additional clarification. I met with founders in third world countries.
Yeah, so Salman added,
Mhm.
I meant founders in third world countries, how they can connect with businesses internationally and provide them services like digital marketing and staffing services, and if doing business like this is even worth it.
Um, yeah, I like say, I still think that's saturated. It definitely helps clarify the relationship. I would say there's always value in localization, and that is also localization with marketing. But I think the biggest assets to that are um and it still goes back to getting the company in touch with the right people in the right place at the right time. If you can show value in a certain location with selling something, so like in the gaming industry, when I went to Unity for a while, which is a game engine for mobile apps, one of the big things are all of the studios and the growth that was happening in Asia, and it had to be done pretty carefully. The teams weren't massive, but they were growing for a lot of the companies that they acquired in different countries. So you look at like South Korea and parts of China and different territories like that. Sometimes it's hard for those companies to initially get in there, either because things like the technical aspects, like the cloud and different areas, are totally cut off and separated from other countries. Like I know China will only keep their stuff on their cloud. They won't start using different technology that's hosted on US clouds or the UK and different things like that. So that's a hurdle, and I think areas like that are because they're so problematic for companies, marketing agencies that can prove the value of a localized customer. I think that's a great starting point and a value add. that a lot of other agencies don't necessarily do because they're so mechanical and it's red ocean and it's just like we can market in this other area or we can set up a call center in the Philippines, things like that. It's like, yeah, that's great, but like I strategically want to expand here. So for gaming, I strategically want to expand in South Korea. How do I do that? Can you market there? Are you familiar with marketing there? What's the language barriers like for marketing materials for our games, for our studios, different things like that? And if you can close that gap, that is very valuable. Um, and it's more blue ocean than red ocean in terms of the market saturation and the way the value is being conveyed. So that's a long-winded way of me saying you're in a saturated market, but you can mix it up to add more value than other companies are by really kind of hitting the biggest pain points of what regional expansion looks like for a company.
I like that. I think that's sound advice for sure. Okay, we are over time by 35 minutes because you're amazing, Craig. Would you like to share anything before we say goodbye? Anything you want to promote, announce, anything like that?
Just want to wish everyone good luck. It sounded like there was a good group today working on some really cool stuff. So, come feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to continue chatting or questions come up and reach out anytime. I love hearing about what you guys are doing. So keep sharing your stuff. Share your vision, like we talked about. Sharing the vision helps keep it alive, keep it bright, and yeah, I get more fun out of hearing what people are doing than anything else. It makes my day. So reach out, keep us posted.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for being bold and brave, asking questions, and sharing what you got going on. Hopefully, everyone got something inspirational, educational out of this. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of the week and good luck with everything. All right. Take care, Craig. You're awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Later, everybody.